At 7:14 on a cold Kentucky morning, my phone buzzed me awake, and before my feet even touched the floor, I watched the president of my HOA walk up my driveway with bolt cutters in her hand like she was heading out to trim roses. Then she cut my gate, pulled a key from her pocket, and slid behind the wheel of my dead son's Jeep like it belonged to her. I've seen a lot of arrogance in my life, but there is something especially ugly about a person who mistakes grief for property management. My name is Van Diacroix, and before retirement, I spent 31 years as a pipe fitter in industrial plants across Appalachian Kentucky, power stations, chemical facilities, paper mills, places that smelled like hot metal, grease, steam, and money burning by the minute whenever something went wrong. I was the guy they called when a line blew at 2 in the morning and nobody else wanted to make the call. I wasn't flashy, I wasn't charming. I just knew how to keep my head when pressure hit, and I learned early that panic makes everything worse. Systems fail for reasons. People do too. If you want to fix either one, you start by paying attention. By the time I retired at 58, I had a decent pension, a left knee that could predict rain more accurately than local weather, and enough saved to buy a house in Crestwood Hollow, a tidy subdivision east of Louisville, where everybody waved from the driveway and almost nobody knew anything real about each other. It was the kind of place with trimmed hedges, basketball hoops over clean garages, and polite smiles that never quite reached the eyes. The house itself was nothing special, but it had a wraparound porch and a detached garage, and that was enough for me. I turned that garage into a workshop the first month I moved in. Pegboard on the wall's table saw in the corner workbench, scarred from years of honest use. That room smelled like cedar dust, oil, old tools, and peace. It was the one place that felt like mine from the beginning. And behind a locked gate on the side of that garage, hidden by a privacy panel, sat my son Darnell's 1998 Jeep Wrangler. Darnell died 3 years before I moved to Crestwood Hollow, 34 years old, healthy as far as anybody knew, gone from a cardiac event that showed up fast, and left nothing behind but questions. You ever lose somebody like that? You know how strange the world feels afterward. The sky still looks the same, the roads still work, people still joke at gas stations, and you stand there thinking, how is everybody acting like the whole earth didn't just get knocked sideways? That Jeep was the last thing I had of him that still felt alive. His fishing rods were still bungeed to the roll bar from our last trip to Taylorsville Lake. A Merle Haggard cassette was still in the tape deck because Darnell had this stubborn little streak where if something worked in 1998, he saw no reason to improve it. There was even a dried-out pine tree air freshener hanging from the mirror, almost colorless by then, but if you leaned in close enough, you could still catch that faint, sweet smell underneath the dust and motor oil. I drove it twice a year, his birthday, and the day I lost him. That was it. Alone, windows down, Merle Haggard playing nobody in the passenger seat. I didn't hide the Jeep because I was afraid it'd get stolen. I hid it because I didn't want anybody's opinions touching it. Then Greta Hollenbeck decided my grief was a covenant violation. Greta had run the Crestwood Hollow HOA for years, the kind of woman who wore polished white sneakers to community events and spoke in that syrupy tone some people use when they're being fake nice and deeply condescending at the same time. She sent certified letters the way other folks send Christmas cards. 6 weeks after I moved in, one of hers landed in my mailbox saying the board had determined that non-compliant recreational vehicle storage violated community standards. Funny thing was, when I dug into the documents, that rule hadn't existed when I bought the house. It had been amended afterward and backdated. So I did what I've always done when something smells wrong. I stopped talking and started documenting. I filed a written objection, requested the original records, sent certified letters, asked careful questions. No accusations, no chest beating, no threats, just paper dates, statutes, signatures. Greta's answer wasn't to explain herself. No, she sent out a landscaping crew to measure my fence and suddenly claimed I was encroaching on HOA land. According to her report, if I had to move the fence, the Jeep would be exposed, and once the Jeep was exposed, she could fine me daily. It was a neat little conveyor belt of punishment, I'll give her that. Problem was I hired my own surveyor. Rosalind Tanaka, steel-toed boots, sharp eyes, 30-plus years, licensed, the kind of woman who looked like she would measure your soul to the millimeter if you asked her. She came out, ran the line, and handed me a certified plat, showing my fence wasn't 18 inches over the boundary like Greta claimed. It was 7 inches inside my own property. Greta's report wasn't just wrong, it was wrong by 25 inches, which is a lot when you're trying to weaponize paperwork. That was when Clifton Marsh entered the story. Clifton lived 2 streets over, retired paralegal, 71 years old, quiet voice, sharp brain, the kind of man who didn't waste syllables. His wife Loretta knew everything that moved through the neighborhood because people trusted her enough to talk. One evening, Clifton showed up with a 6-pack of Ale 8 and sat at my kitchen table for 2 hours explaining how people like Greta stayed in power, not through strength but through isolation. Pick one homeowner at a time, keep every dispute private, make everybody feel overwhelmed, make them think they're the only one. He also told me Kentucky is a one-party consent state for recordings. That little fact changed everything. A week later, Greta held an emergency board meeting with improper notice and pushed through a $75 per day fine against me anyway. I sat in the back recorder running in my shirt pocket and watched 4 board members stare at the table while she acted like due process was a decorative suggestion. When I stood up and called the vote defective under their own bylaws, she gave me that thin little smile and told me I could file an appeal for a $250 fee. That right there told me what kind of game I was in. Not governance, extortion with minutes attached. Then Greta got uglier. She started making the rounds, whispering to neighbors that I was causing issues, hinting I might hurt property values, dropping little class-coded comments about my union background and trade work. 10 days after that, a couple nearby, Dale and Shirley Pwitt, filed a noise complaint on me over my workshop. Only problem there was I knew my table saw's decibel range better than they did. I was within county limits. Complaint got dismissed. But later, Loretta learned the real story through the walking group. The Pwitts were behind on their HOA dues after a bad medical year, and Greta had offered them a deal, help her build a case against me, and she'd delay lien proceedings. That was the moment the whole thing changed for me. Up to then, Greta was just a bully with paperwork. After that, I understood what she really was. She'd built a system that fed on vulnerable people. So Clifton and I laid it all out on my kitchen table: backdated amendment, fake survey, invalid fine, vote, coerced complaint. Then came the first real twist. One Sunday evening, there was a knock at my door, and standing there was Harwick Boone, one of Greta's own board members, holding a Ziploc bag of peanut butter cookies like he was about to apologize for the Civil War. He came in, sat down, and after a long silence said, "I kept records." Turns out Harwick had notes, emails, enforcement logs, contract summaries, 3 years of them. And once attorney Waverly Okafor got her hands on that folder, the whole thing cracked open wider than either of us expected. The Jeep wasn't the story anymore. The story was money. 41 withdrawals from the HOA maintenance account over 3 years. Every one of them just under the threshold that required a second approval. $1,200, $1,360, $1,480. Never over $1,500. Not once. $51,000 gone in tidy little slices. Then Clifton found the real bomb buried in the original 1987 covenants. Section 14B required a 2/3 vote of the full membership to amend the rules. Greta's vehicle storage amendment, the one she'd used as the foundation for everything she'd done to me, had never been approved by the homeowners at all. Just a board vote. 5 people at a folding table pretending they had authority they did not have. That amendment wasn't flawed. It was void from the beginning. That meant every fine issued under it, every threat, every enforcement letter, every lien, all of it sat on legal error. Waverly moved fast. Declaratory judgment, fair housing complaint, preservation letter over the surveillance camera Greta had aimed into my yard. Contact with the Attorney General's office. Meanwhile, I went door to door through Crestwood Hollow with documents in hand, not speeches, just proof. 7 households signed a petition for a special meeting. Then Harwick signed, and that made 9 enough to force one. You'd think that would have made Greta back off. Nope, it made her desperate. The night before everything happened, I sat on my porch in the October dark with a cup of coffee and thought about Darnell, about the Pwitts, about all those families who'd paid fines they couldn't afford because they thought they had no choice. The air smelled like wood smoke and damp leaves, and for the first time I had this feeling in my gut that something was about to break. At 7:14 the next morning, it did. The motion alert hit my phone, and there she was, Greta beige, windbreaker, bolt cutters in hand, walking up my gravel drive like she had every right in the world. She cut the decoy lock, opened the gate, reached into her pocket and pulled out a copied key to my son's Jeep. That detail still gets me, because that meant this wasn't some burst of temper. She'd planned it. She'd gotten access to the original key at some point, had a copy made, and sat on that plan until she thought the walls were closing in. She climbed behind the wheel, adjusted the mirror, settled in, and backed the Jeep out. I was already on the phone with 911. The GPS tracker I'd installed was live. The dash cam was recording, and Sergeant Tyrell Abner, already aware of the bigger investigation, told me one thing only: don't move, let us handle it. What I didn't know then was that a multi-agency task force had already staged nearby before dawn with a signed search warrant for Greta's house. They'd planned to hit at 9. My 911 call moved the clock up. At 7:24, patrol units stopped Greta less than half a mile from my house. She actually tried to hand the officer some HOA letterhead claiming impound authority. The officer looked at her, and said, "Ma'am, homeowners associations do not impound vehicles in Kentucky. That's not a thing." Yeah, that happened. At 7:33, task force vehicles rolled up to Greta's house. And what they found in there, Lord: meticulous financial files, her private spreadsheet tracking the withdrawals, a lockbox with labeled property keys, a handwritten notebook with addresses, schedules, access notes, enough material to turn neighborhood gossip into evidence. By afternoon, even the HOA's own attorney had peeled away from her, explaining he represented the association, not Greta, personally. That little moment might have been the first time in 11 years she realized the machine she'd used on everyone else was not in fact hers. 2 weeks later, the special membership meeting was held in the elementary school gym. More than 100 people showed up. Waverly laid out the Void Amendment. Clifton projected the 41 withdrawals on the screen. Harwick read the court order. Every fine under that fake rule had to be refunded within 90 days. 12 households, $34,000. And when it was my turn, I got up to the microphone and said the only thing that mattered. I said when Greta put bolt cutters on that gate and hands on that wheel, she wasn't enforcing a rule, she was trespassing on a grief that didn't belong to her. You could have heard a pin drop in that gym. A few weeks later, formal criminal charges were filed. Civil recovery followed. Refund checks went out. Greta's little kingdom collapsed under the weight of her own paperwork. And 6 months after all of it, the HOA created a community assistance fund in Darnell's name, so no family in Crestwood Hollow would ever again be cornered the way the Pwitts had been. That part mattered to me more than the headlines. Because here's the truth I learned: people like Greta don't survive because they're brilliant, and they sure don't survive because they're strong. They survive because decent people are tired, busy grieving, working, raising kids, paying bills, dealing with surgeries, trying to get through the week. Small power feeds on silence. It counts on you assuming you're alone. Most of the time, the thing that breaks it isn't some hero charging in. It's records. It's neighbors talking. It's one person deciding to stop being intimidated by official-looking paper. That's the bitter little lesson, I guess. Greed loves procedure and cruelty loves isolation. But both of them start shaking the second the truth gets organized. These days, the Jeep stays in the garage, the gate is new, the lock is stronger, and the Merle Haggard tape is still in the deck. I still drive it on Darnell's birthday. I still drive it on the day I lost him. And sometimes on quiet Sundays, I drive it over to Clifton and Loretta's place, and we sit on the porch with coffee and talk about anything except HOAs. That's the part nobody puts on the news, the part after karma lands, when life gets quiet again, and for the first time in a long while, quiet feels like justice. So let me ask you this. When somebody abuses a little bit of power for years, and the law finally catches up, is that justice or just overdue bookkeeping? And if you've ever dealt with an HOA, a bully with paperwork, or somebody who thought rules made them untouchable, drop your story and your opinion. Who was right, who was wrong, and how far would you have gone to protect what mattered to you?
Cảm ơn các bạn đã xem video.